This is Nicole. We are going to go ahead and get started with our Kern County Coalition's Joint Grower Education Meeting. Just wanted to welcome everybody. Before we get started in the actual presentation, I am going to turn it over to Brianna so that she can go through some Zoom housekeeping and make this an easier process for everyone. So Brianna, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Just want to go over a few housekeeping rules for Zoom. We have a raised hand feature, and I will be able to select ask to unmute. And so you'll be able to talk if you have a question. And then we also have a Q&A feature. This is just on the toolbar at the bottom, and you'll be able to ask a question here. We just ask that questions stay in the Q&A box, and the chat feature also on the bottom toolbar would be designated for any technical questions that you might have, and we'll be able to help you through there. And then questions will be answered through the chat and interspersed as people are speaking and presenting. And then just as a reminder, we have a survey at the end. Please don't close your browser because it will automatically load after the webinar is finished. And this is just to help receive any feedback, and then not to be confused with the attendance survey that you'll receive credit for attending today. And as a follow-up reminder, I'd like to remind everyone that whatever you put in the Q&A and the chat is visible to everyone. If you'd like to change that, there is a feature to do so that the hosts and panelists would be able to see. Feel free, if you are having trouble, to type that into the chat and I can help assist. And I'll turn it over to Nicole.
Great, thank you. All right, moving right along. As we did Tuesday at our live meeting, we will try to get through today's meeting within the hour. You may remember, we're at year 9 now, and previous years we took hour meetings. This year there's not a lot of changes. We do have to have the meeting, so we are going to do our best to get you out as soon as possible, but we still want you to have the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. At this point, I'm sure you are aware of all of the irrigated lands coalitions in Kern County. The next few slides are just the contact information for each of the coalition managers, which at this point, I know you all know how to reach us if you have questions for us. Reminder that annual meeting attendance is required by everyone now each year, and you need to make sure whether you attend in person or via Zoom, you are required to register all of your memberships in each of the Kern County coalitions that you participate. So if you registered for this Zoom meeting and you have 4 memberships and you only registered with 1 membership number, you do need to get back to Courtney Mancour. Her email address is here. So email her with the membership name, ID, and coalition so that she can make sure that gets put on the appropriate attendance record so that you will be documented as attending for each of the memberships. This is nothing new. Each year you always have to enroll, or excuse me, attend and register for each of your memberships. There's a question about needing to sign in our name and membership number. You already have done that. If you're viewing this presentation, you could not receive the Zoom link unless you went through the registration process. So you've at least entered 1 membership number, but if you have multiple membership numbers and names, you do need to register all of them. You won't want to go back to the registration link at this point. You can just email Courtney at the email address that was on the previous slide, which if you have a pen and you want to write it down, because you won't be able to see the slide right off, that is cmancour, so it's CMANCOUR at ppeng.com. That's cmancour at ppeng.com. And that's only if you have additional memberships that you need to register. All right, next slide, please. And next slide. Perfect. So 3 different options for attending an annual meeting this year, same as last year. We had the in-person on Tuesday, the Zoom meeting today, and then for any growers that were not able to participate either today or Tuesday, we are recording this webinar. It will be posted to our website next week, and growers can log on and watch the video in order to get their time in for the year. But as a reminder, when you go to watch that video, when you're done, you have to go back to the our website, not ILRP Farm, but our actual website at krwca.org, and fill out the grower attendance survey that will be linked right under the YouTube link where you watched the webinar. That's important. Last year we had several people watch, but they didn't do the survey, so we have no way of tracking who the grower watched but didn't complete the grower attendance survey. So please be sure to do that. And sorry guys, there's a little delay because I'm trying to keep track of questions in the chats too. So just as a reminder, this year, once again, this is the 2nd year of only having to do the nitrogen summary report that gets turned into the coalition through ILRP Farm, and the irrigation and nitrogen summary report that gets turned in, and the irrigation and nitrogen management plan that remains on farm. There is no farm evaluation or management practices implementation report due for the 2022 crop year. You are very aware of all the due dates. March 1st is the due date. Once again, no extensions, and it will always be March 1st unless for some reason the general order is revised and a new deadline is provided. That's been the same deadline we've had since the beginning of the program 9 years ago. Then just a reminder, all farmed irrigated land, so anything that is being irrigated must be enrolled. So if you newly purchased land or took over a new lease and you didn't get that enrolled during our enrollment process that took place October through November, please make sure you do so by contacting me, and I can help get that acreage enrolled. It happens every year. It's not uncommon that when you start to do your reports that are due by March 1st, many times growers will realize that not all their land is there. Something was overlooked, so that we need to get that added back in. Please do not file reports if not all of your land is there. It doesn't take us long to get that taken care of. You'll just need to contact me directly. I'll provide the required form depending on the situation, and then I will get it updated for you. All right, again, this year was our 3rd year with the online payment process. I want to thank everybody who participated. It has really cut down the time, so it's been very much more efficient and cost effective for our members since you all pay for the administration of the program. So we will continue to do that. This year was the first year we added that we did not mail out the invoices, rather they were made available through your membership, and I just sent email reminders letting you know to log in to obtain your invoice, and that worked out very well. So we will continue to do that as in the future. But I just wanted to tell you all how much I appreciate your cooperation with the new processes as we develop. Something new this year. Last year I touched on CV salts, the Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for long-term sustainability, and just refer to that as CV salts. You may remember last year that I just let you know that there are 2 parts to CV salts: salt compliance and nitrate compliance. All members of the coalitions must comply with the CV salts requirements because you are permitted dischargers. But rather than you having to deal with these additional regulations on your own, the coalitions have taken on the responsibility to handle the CV salts requirements of the basin plan for you. So the salt compliance program, the P&O study is how that is being handled. That is in its third year of the study being developed. So we have been collecting funds from you for 3 years now and paying the state for that program for all of the parcels that are enrolled within the 4 Kern coalitions. The nitrate control program, which will be handled through management zone participation, is not yet required, meaning we are in priority 2 areas. So we have not yet received notices to comply by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Several coalitions north of us have been doing the nitrate compliance program through management zones for 2 years now. We anticipated getting our notice to comply this past year. The regional board put that off. We thought we were going to get it early this year, and we are now told it will be late this year that we will receive notices to comply with the nitrate control program for CV salt. So all permitted dischargers receive those notices to comply. But for permitted dischargers, parcels that are enrolled in the irrigated lands coalitions, that is a general order that basically instead of you having your own individual discharge permit, the discharge permit will be, it's with the coalition on your behalf. So we will receive the notices to comply for the nitrate control program for all of our enrolled parcels, and we will handle that on your behalf through the coalition. So last year we did collect money for the nitrate control program with the understanding that we were going to receive our notice to comply in 2022, but we did not. So that money that was collected has been rolled into 2023. We did not collect any additional monies with this year's enrollment for the CV salts nitrate compliance program. Let me stop for a moment. I do see we have a hand raised. Brianna, will you let Greg ask his question?
You should be good to go, Greg.
Greg, did you have a question for us? Okay. Greg, do you want to type your question? Okay, that's sorry, accident. Okay, perfect. That was an easy answer. Moving right along. Next slide, please. So in order to prepare for the nitrate control program requirements, many interested parties led by all of the Kern County irrigated lands coalitions. We have been working for more than 18 months now to get the appropriate discharger communities, managers together to talk about the requirements of CV salts and having to establish management zones in Kern County. In 2022, so this past year, we did establish a 501c3, the Kern Water Collaborative. That was initiated by the irrigated lands folks. We have oil and gas participants, POTW participants, city and county folks have been participating, as well as food processors and dairy and cattle industry. The entity was established. The board of directors was seated this past summer. It's made up of 11 industry representatives from irrigated lands, which has 6 seats. Oil and gas has 2 board seats. Dairy and cattle has 1 board seat. And those main board industries appointed a food processor representative and a publicly owned treatment works representative, making up the 11 industry board of directors. I have been acting as the coordinator and manager of that group and will continue to do so. The plan is for the organization to be housed with the Kern River Watershed Coalition at our current offices. And you will be hearing more about this as we move forward. We're probably 12 months out from receiving our notice to comply, so a lot more will be happening over the next 12 months. And when appropriate, we will be holding outreach and education meetings specifically for the Kern Water Collaborative and the management zone regulation, which is separate from irrigated lands. But in order to keep rates down for our growers, we have taken a lead in moving this program forward and assisting our growers with meeting compliance. Just looking at the messages. Are there any, I don't see hands up, Q&A or chat. There is a question about who can see messages. If you type a message, everyone will see it unless you specifically do the drop down and send it just to me. Otherwise, everyone will see any questions in the chat or the questions that you write down. The cvsalinity.org website does have a lot of information about CV salts, the requirements, and actually also has information for the 5 management zones that are priority 1 areas that are been through the process for the past 2 years. Our management zone, I think we skipped a slide, or I didn't cover it when we were at that slide, will cover all, it's going to cover 4 management zones to ensure that all of the 4 Kern Irrigated Lands coalitions are covered. The management zones being managed by the parent entity Kern Water Collaborative will cover the west side south watershed, the Kern River watershed, and the Pozo watershed, as well as a small portion of Kings County that is administered by the Westside Water Quality Coalition Irrigated Lands Program. So we are all working together jointly to make sure all of our growers are covered for this program. We are anticipating the notice to comply to come at the end of 2023. As I mentioned, the coalitions will handle the notice to comply and requirements for all enrolled acreage. But if you do have individual permits on other lands or perhaps facilities, you will receive your own notice to comply. And at the time of giving the notice to comply, you will be given 6 months to determine if you're going to join the management zone. And the management zone, because we've already developed it, will be included in that letter, so you know what your options are. And by then, I anticipate you would have already heard quite a bit from your irrigated lands coalitions on the process. If you need a copy of your invoice and you don't remember your user number is, the username is always your member number. And then of course, whatever password you set. And if you don't remember your password, you can do a password reset right there on the sign-on screen. And if you don't remember your member number, you can contact me and I'll give it to you. There is a question about paying since 2021 in CV salt salinity control program. That is the P&O study, and you as an individual discharger are required to participate in the P&O study, which is for salt. The nitrate control program, which the management zones, that is for the nitrate side of CV salts. Both of those programs, any enrolled acreage is handled by the coalition. If you have separate permits, you have to take care of the requirements for those separate permits. So for the person who asked the question, I don't want to call you out. I don't know if everybody's seeing these. You are in compliance both through the coalition and then on your own, since you did participate in the salinity control program when you received your notice to comply. So thumbs up to you. Any other questions? If at any time throughout this presentation you have questions, feel free to type them in. Of course, I'm always available after this meeting too for any questions that you might have. So feel free to reach out. At this time, I will go ahead and turn it over to Morgan Campbell. She will talk about our priority practices at Farm Builder.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Morgan.
No problem. Yeah, if you guys have any questions at any time throughout the presentation, feel free to type them in and Brianna will help me get those read out to me so I can get them answered for you. My name is Morgan Campbell. I'm an environmental scientist supporting all the Kern coalitions with ILRP compliance, and I'm going to present a priority practices refresher. So we have 3 key priority practices, and then I'm also going to walk you through the first step of turning in your required regulatory forms for this year using our ILRP Farm online system. So there are 3 key priority practices that the regional board has emphasized as critical to being protective of groundwater quality. And they ultimately would like to see 100% implementation of this across all growers' memberships. So the first one is proper well destruction and abandonment practices. The second is wellhead protection practices. And the third is accounting for nitrogen in your irrigation water. So first up, well destruction and proper abandonment practices. Wells are a direct path to groundwater. So when you have an abandoned well, there is the potential for contaminated surface water intrusion to have a direct conduit through the well into the groundwater aquifer. And so the general order does require that all members ensure that abandoned wells on their property are properly destroyed. And properly destroyed means that you go through the Kern County Environmental Health Services instructions for appropriate destruction procedures. And so that is available online. They have an informative handout that tells you exactly who to contact to schedule having someone come out and certifying the proper abandonment of your well. Last year, we did have 79% of reported KRWCA wells being abandoned and destroyed in a certified manner. Again, the target is 100%. We understand that some of you might have purchased land and inherited abandoned wells and they've been destroyed and you don't know the method. That's completely understandable. And this target of 100% might never actually come to fruition, but we are expected to aim towards it. There is an additional fact sheet available at this URL as well, just walking you through why this is an important practice for being protective of groundwater quality. Second is wellhead protection practices. And so these are applicable to both active and inactive irrigation wells. I think active irrigation well speaks for itself. You're actively using it. When we use the term inactive, what we mean is that it's a well that you have shut off and you're not using it that year for irrigation, but you have plans in the future to use it if circumstances change. And so key wellhead protection practices that we're looking to implement include things like backflow prevention or check valve, air gap, good housekeeping practices, avoiding standing water around the wellhead, having the ground sloped away from the wellhead, and having an intact concrete pad. So you can see implementation on these practices based upon data that we gathered in 2020 ranges from 55% to 98%. And of course, not all practices are applicable for every type of well. And so while it's unlikely that any single one of these will hit 100% for things like an air gap, there are practices that are applicable to everyone, and that's things like good housekeeping practices. And we are seeing really high levels of implementation there. 98% is really close to that 100%. So it is very encouraging to see that most 84% of reported wells within KRWCA are reporting at least one wellhead protection practice. And there's an additional fact sheet there as well about why wellhead protection practices are critical to protecting groundwater quality if you're interested in learning more. The third priority practice is accounting for nitrogen in irrigation water. And so this is a critical practice. Essentially, whatever nitrogen exists in your irrigation water is free nitrogen that you can use to reduce the fertilizer inputs that you need and save money. I know fertilizer is really expensive this year specifically, and this is an opportunity for a small amount of cost savings. But most importantly, not only testing your water to figure out what the concentration of nitrogen is in it, but then you need to account for this in your INMP worksheet. And Ryan's going to walk you through what that INMP worksheet looks like and how you would account for it. But essentially, you need to look at that amount of nitrogen being applied through your irrigation water when looking at your total fertilization plan for the year. And so again, the goal for this practice is 100% implementation. In 2021, we saw 81% of reported KRWCA members and acres implementing this practice. And it was even better to see that 88% of those members that did test their water went on further to then adjust their fertilizer rates based upon that result. So there are some folks that are reporting barriers to adoption, such as cost, or they don't think it's important, or it's too much effort, or a lack of knowledge. If you're sitting in that camp, we really encourage you to take a look at the fact sheet, which really explains why this is a critical practice and how it can actually help you become more efficient and save money. And then there's also a very helpful tool called the Irrigation Water Nitrogen Calculator. This is available online, and it allows you to take your concentration of nitrogen that the laboratory gives back to you and calculate pounds per acre based upon the volume of water that you're applying to your land. So moving away from priority practices, Brianna, are there any questions in the chat or the Q&A to address?
No, we've been kind of answering most of the simple ones. Yes, the recording will be posted to the website along with the PowerPoint presentation.
Perfect. Okay, so now that we've
hold on. There is a question about, I don't know that I'm seeing the whole question. It's talking about a hole being evacuated around the well casing to a depth of 5 feet below the ground surface, and the well casing removed to the bottom of the excavation, not 3 feet, I think is what it's trying to say.
Nicole, can you repeat the question in there? Are they asking if that's a proper abandonment procedure, or?
It's more of a statement. It says, please note that it's a water resources requirement. And that the hole should be 5 feet, not 3 feet. Did you say a hole should be 3 feet per Kern County?
No, I never mentioned specifics.
Okay. We can address that.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that
to.
Once we've gotten through these slides. So.
You bet.
Okay, so the regulatory form submission process for crop harvest year 2022. And so this is the beginning step for how you will be able to submit your irrigation nitrogen management plan summary report, which again is due to the coalition by March 1st. So the very first step in this is to log into ILRP Farm. And as Nicole mentioned, when you come to the login screen, you'll use your user ID or your member number. If you've forgotten your password, you can click the forget password link. It will send an email. Whatever email is registered to your membership, that is the email that will receive the password reset link. And then you will be able to reset the password from there. Once you've logged in, the first step is to go to Farm Builder, which you'll see on the left-hand toolbar of the screen when you log in. And the first thing you're going to do is create your farm in Farm Builder. And for those of you that, you've been doing this 9 years at this point, fields that have previously been built in Farm Builder roll over each year. But if any changes have been made to the information on those fields, such as crop type, irrigation type, the amount of irrigated acres, if you have new APNs, you do need to go in and make those updates. So you will build any new fields or changed fields. You'll assign field names to the APNs enrolled as of January 1st of 2022. It will ask you for information such as the name of the field, how many acres, if it's organic versus conventional, what crop types are grown, and the irrigation methods used. As a note, you do need to enter a date planted for permanent crops. That's because nitrogen uptake rates are different for different age groupings of permanent crops. And that's important for calculating your A over R, or applied nitrogen over removed nitrogen ratio. Ryan's going to cover a little bit more about what that means, but you do need to enter a date planted for permanent crops. If you don't know, it's okay to estimate it. And then you'll also enter the APN field acres associated with the field. So here is an example of what Farm Builder looks like in ILRP Farm for a generic member. In this case, the member has 3 APNs and a total of 277 irrigated acres enrolled in the coalition. And you can see right now that Farm Builder is flagging that there are issues. And common errors that we see are, one, that total field acres for all fields entered have to end up equaling your total irrigated acres enrolled in the coalition. And all APNs that you've enrolled in the coalition must be assigned to at least 1 field. And Farm Builder is going to tell you these errors and guide you through how you can rectify that, but you do need to fix those things before continuing on to your INMP summary report. So the first step is to create your fields by clicking Add New Field. So that's the blue button there. When you click on that button, it will pop up this screen and you will assign your field info. So again, you'll create a field ID name. This is what you call the field. So if it's oranges 2, whatever your business calls that field, that's what you'll enter in as the field ID name, the number of field acres, if it's conventional versus organic, what crop type it is, plant date if that's applicable for permanent crops. You'll select a primary irrigation type, and then secondary irrigation type is optional. Your third step is going to be assigning field and APN field acres. So the first thing you're going to do is choose the APN the field is located on. So for field test, which is the field ID that I've assigned for this test, we're going to say, we're going to go up in that right-hand corner and select the APNs. Once you select an APN that field's located on, you'll click that green plus button and then hit the blue button to save changes. So in this example, this field actually covers 3 APNs. And so then you need to assign the field and APN field acres. So when we say APN field acres, that's the number of acres on that APN you are actively farming, that are irrigated, actively farming acres. So in this case, there's this field overlays 3 APNs, and each APN has, for the first APN, you have 77 field acres, for the second you have 160, and for the third you have 40. And you're going to see everything starts turning green because your total number of field acres equals what you typed in at the top for field acres of 277. Field acres is the acres for that specific field. So in this case, almonds 1 is a total of 277 acres split over 3 APNs. It is okay to have 2 or more APNs assigned to a single field. We recognize that fields do not line up perfectly with APN boundaries, and 2+ fields on an APN is also okay. As always, make sure to save your changes as you go. And a reminder, so the common issues we see is your reported total field acres and APN field acres must match the total irrigated acres for the reporting year. So however many acres you have enrolled in the coalition, you have to build that many fields to account for all of those irrigated acres. And if you irrigate 100.2 acres and enroll 100.2 acres with the coalition, you need to make sure that you're reporting your field acres to that level of precision. So you'll need to make sure to have that 0.2. We've had some folks frustrated that they're like, well, I have 100 acres and I've tried to make it match. That's why, because you have to match it up to the exact decimal point that you have enrolled. You need to create fields applicable to all the land that you actively have enrolled in order to report on your INMP summary report. Your fields are copied over from year to year, but any changes in crop type, irrigation type, anything like that do need to be changed from year to year. So make sure to take a look at it. And you must create new fields if you have any newly enrolled APNs in the reporting year. So I can pause for questions. And before I hand it off to my colleague, Ryan Dodd, if there's any coming through, otherwise I'm happy to hand it off to Ryan.
Just giving it just a quick pause here, see if there's any chats or questions. I don't see any coming in.
Ryan, can you flip your presenter view?
Yeah. You good?
Perfect, looks great.
Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. Again, as we saw, my name is Ryan Dodd. Good to talk to you all again. And we're mostly going to be a review today, not too many new things, mostly related to the nitrogen reporting process and related things. And although it's mostly going to be a review of things, that's ultimately a good thing, right? Because if there was a whole lot of new things to cover, that would mean more regulatory requirements were being imposed on you all, more reporting forms, and just more paperwork or burdens. And so I'm sure most of you would agree that that's probably not a good thing. So the fact that a lot of this stuff review it is a good thing. So I do have around 30 something slides, but I am going to be skirting over many of those because they're mostly just there kind of for a reminder, and you'll have them in the posted video and for reference there if you need them. And most of those slides I'll skirt over ones that we've covered quite a bit in the past. So we're just going to continue with our regulatory form reporting process in ILRP farm. So I'm picking up where Morgan left off. So we built our farm in Farm Builder there. And so now we're going to move into completing the main piece of paperwork this year, which is the 2022 crop harvest year irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report, or the INMP summary report. So let's jump into that. This is just a reminder, it's been covered already. I'm sure the vast majority of folks are familiar with the March 1, 2023 deadline, but just keep in mind that there is the INMP worksheet that has to be completed for the 2023 crop harvest year. So that's looking forward, and that stays on farm, not submitted to the coalition. And the INMP summary report that you're going to submit by March 1 to the coalition is actually to the 2022 crop harvest year looking backwards. So just something to keep track of because there's multiple timelines going on with this ILRP nitrogen reporting. Crop harvest year information. I'm just going to throw this up on the slide. I think hopefully most of us got the handle of that now, but it's basically the year in which you completed your harvest. It really only comes into play for things like small grains, winter wheat, or things like navel oranges and things like that, where harvest could start in one year and finish in the next. But just a reminder what this crop harvest or crop harvest completion year actually represents, because that's important in terms of when you actually report that to the coalition. So always want to remind folks on that. And this presentation I'm going through is just going to cover the 2022 crop harvest year INMP worksheet very briefly, and then more so the 2022 crop harvest year INMP summary report. So irrigation and nitrogen management planning objectives. So we've covered this one quite a bit in the past, so I'm not necessarily going to go over it all, but just remember that why are we doing this? We're doing it because it's a regulatory requirement. That's the foundational reason. But we also are doing it to provide some information to coalitions. We can provide some information back to you. We can submit the required reports to maintain compliance on your behalf, and maybe even optimize or reduce inputs. Fertilizer prices, at least around 3 to 6 months ago, we're going pretty crazy. And so maybe there's an opportunity to save a little bit on water inputs through a result of this process and others. So that's mostly the objectives we're trying to achieve from this process. In terms of the ILRP worksheet steps, they're just shown here on the screen. And we'll very briefly step through those. Note that in previous years, we have went through these in a lot of detail, but the first place we want to start is reviewing our nitrogen analysis report, or a NAR, as we're going to call it the rest of the time. And hopefully that most are familiar with that at this point, but it's kind of like your report card from your previous year's nitrogen reporting to the coalition. And it tells you whether or not you had outlier fields, things like that. So before you start your next year's reporting, it probably makes sense to review your nitrogen report card, right? That way, in case if there are issues or something that could be addressed that's under your control as a grower, then hopefully we can get those addressed so that issue doesn't continue manifesting year after year, which would not generally be a good thing, right? We don't want to be outliers. We don't want to stand out in terms of high nitrogen use. And so reviewing that NAR before you start your ILRP worksheet process for the next year will be a good thing. Then the rest of this is basically just steps to completing the forms. So you basically complete your ILRP worksheet and certify it. And then after the season, complete your actual column. You've got a plan, which you do maybe around now, certainly by March 1. And then after harvest is completed, you would fill out your actual column. And then you would, after that, complete your ILRP summer report by March 1, 2023. So
Ryan, it looks like John has a question. I've unmuted. I've allowed him to talk.
Okay.
Yes, the question is, how many years of the reporting is a grower required to keep if we're already into year 9?
In terms of record keeping, you're saying?
Yes. How many years is
10
required?
years.
10 years for everything related to irrigated lands.
10 years.
Yep.
Lots of binders.
Well, keep in mind, all of your reports are available through your online portal. So you don't have to print everything out. That's why we've made the system the way we have. You can file PDFs on your computer.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're trying to make it as easy for you as possible, but the legal requirement is 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks, John. Okay, so stepping forward here, we're going to talk in a little bit of detail, not a lot, about the nitrogen analysis report, which I have labeled as ILRP Step 1. And but before we do that, we have to understand what is this AR or A over R or A minus R thing. What is that? And very important, but A represent for the ILRP, at least it's very important, the Irrigated Lands Program. A is total applied nitrogen, and R is nitrogen removed from the field via crop harvest, and maybe a little bit of permanent crop, basically tree nitrogen to build the tree. So, hopefully this is mostly a review, but if not, we need to get it to that point. It's basically a metric used for nitrogen use efficiency, and it is being used right now. That's how we would classify certain fields as outliers, which we'll touch on a little bit, is based on their A over R metric. And right now, there's not an explicit limit to what that could be. But as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, there are things going on in the background, and there likely will be ranges or more other parts of the program, such as this groundwater protection process that I'll touch on, that may have more strict, maybe not so much strict, but at least specific, explicit numeric limits to some of these things. So very important to understand that. And so just to kind of show an example of that, maybe something, a little bit of a joke here is use an example from the 2022 college football playoff national championship, if any of you are football fans. So, we've got Georgia versus TCU. And if I say that A, as an example, was total points allowed by TCU, which happened to be 65, and R was total points scored, which unfortunately for them was only 7. So what would that look like in terms of AR ratios? Well, as I showed here, if I take those scores and divide them, that would come to an A over R ratio of over 9. And that is not a good A over R ratio, at least for TCU. Now, if we flip those numbers for Georgia, that'd be a great ratio for them. The point here I'm just trying to show is that we actually have nitrogen ratios that are in this range. And what this would look like in terms of a nitrogen ratio is it would suggest that potentially on that field, a grower put as much as 9 times more nitrogen than they removed with their crop harvest. And in general, for a regulatory water quality program related to nitrates and groundwater, which is what a lot of the program is focused on, that's not a good thing, right? We don't really want to see that. We want that number to be as close to 1 as possible. It's never going to be, exactly 1. There's various inefficiencies in the system. But just like that, this is not a good ratio for TCU. High ratios are not good in terms of nitrogen use either. So just wanted to throw that up there. So ILRP step 1, the NAR. So this is, although we've been doing a lot of these items, talked about a lot of these things for many years, in terms of the NAR being in ILRP Farm on the online portal, this is only the 2nd year that that's been the case. So a relatively new process. And so it's accessible 2 ways, either via the dashboard here when you log in and you see this screen and this big orange banner, pretty obvious, hard to miss, or clicking over here on the sidebar here, which is generally what I use. And so note that the previous years are now available on there. So it's only 2 years available so far, but moving forward in the program, kind of that 10-year question, they'll be in there in perpetuity there. In terms of the layout, it's shown here on the screen, but basically some of this may be hard to see, but log on for more details. But overall, it summarizes just your general member info. You can select your crop harvest year now, which will become more important as the years move forward. And then a new feature this year that we added is this historical outlier status. So what that's just going to show is year after year, were you deemed an outlier for that year, and how many outlier fields may you have? So let's say we're 5 years in the future and your number of outlier fields went down every single year and maybe went all the way to 0. That would be a good thing. And conversely, it would be not a good thing if that number of fields is going up, right? So that's kind of a new little thing that may help. Then there's just a big button. It's either going to be red or blue. It's actually not a button, just a big notification that says whether you're an outlier or not. And then your actual results here of your report card. So let's step into that just a little bit, but just keep in mind that most things related to nitrogen reporting in ILRP Farm and the NAR, think of the stoplight approach, okay? So red is generally bad, or at least an error, meaning numbers could be really high or maybe really low compared to typical numbers. Yellow means okay, but getting there, it's getting either too high or too low. So you might want to think about it just a little bit, but still okay. And then green, of course, being okay. So, or not an outlier in this case. So in terms of the NAR, if you're in this red area, that means you're an outlier. So just to zoom in on this a little bit, what would this look like? So this is just summarizing your fields. This is the data you reported to the coalition here, your nitrogen applications, your crop yield, and then some of these metrics or the A over R ratio that I talked about. And then a little graph that shows where you're at with a little black dot on it. That little black dot represents that field's status or A over R number for the most part compared to all other crops grown in that coalition. And so if you're in the red, that means that you're much higher than every other crop in that coalition. And the further to the right you are over here, the higher you are than most other folks growing that crop. So think about this stoplight approach. I'm going to throw up a little black dot here. So if you're in the green, you're looking pretty good. If you're in the yellow, you're getting a little high there. You may want to think about it. Basically, you're within 15% of that outlier metric. And then if you move into that red, that means you're an outlier. So keep an eye on where this little dot is, and that's how you can figure out where you stand in terms of outlier status. So tools and resources, what do I do if I didn't make any errors, but my reported fields are still outliers? This is mostly a repeat slide, so it's just mostly here for reference. But still encourage folks to call the coalition if you have questions, work with your CCA, continue to utilize this California fertilization guidelines, which is an excellent resource. Couple new things here is crop manage. This is a grower decision support tool. It's starting to add a lot more crops in the Central Valley. It can really help with irrigation and nitrogen management as well. There's also a new UC nitrogen course covering a lot of things that we're talking about today that could be of interest for some really trying to hone in on your nitrogen management. And then this is just from the California fertilization guidelines, just a reminder that there's actually a nitrogen uptake and partitioning curves there for a lot of crops. What does that mean? Kind of if you think about the 4 R's and the right timing here. So this could just be something like the traditional UC Davis recommendation of 20% of the nitrogen on almonds, and then 30%, and then 20% timing to split up your nitrogen. But there's applications, but there's a lot of crops on here. And in terms of not only getting the right rate, but also the right time, some of this information on this website may be helpful to some. So irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet. As it says here on the slide, I'm not going to go through that in detail. We have done that for a number of years. I'm really just going to kind of quickly scroll through those slides just to be respectful of your time today. But I did want to say that at this link here from a webinar we did in 2021, actually, we do step through that in more detail there. So if you'd like more information on that, that video is there for you, and you can see stepping through that form in more detail. Reminder, this is the ILRP worksheet completed. Again, we're not going to go through how to complete that, but this is just an example of a completed worksheet here. And note that the items in the red boxes that I'm flashing on the screen are the items that are extracted out of the ILRP worksheet and that get reported to the coalition via the ILRP summary report. Just yet another reminder, we're going to remind you this of every year, that the ILRP worksheet does require certification for most folks. There are some limited exceptions, but for the most part, everyone needs to certify those. And this is not something that pest control advisors in and of themselves can certify. So it does need to be CCA, certified crop advisors with the California nitrogen certification, or maybe more importantly, the grower self-certification program, which I'll touch on in a bit in a later slide. So that's it for the ILRP worksheet. Now I'm going to jump in to talk about the irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report, which this is most important in terms of the coalition, because until we get accurate data from this report, that's everything that we base all of our analysis and reports on. So it's important to get that correct and finish the process. So just like the ILRP worksheet, it's mostly the same information, just carried over to a new form. So here, just kind of showing where from the ILRP worksheet, the actual column, how that information translates into the ILRP summary report, the paper version. We don't necessarily recommend using the paper version of the ILRP summary report anymore. It's not required. KRWCA, for example, does not accept paper copies of those, but some may still use it. And if you do fill it out, that's fine, but know that you still need to get that same information into ILRP Farm. So this is the main section of the ILRP summary report here. It's the quantitative section, nitrogen use and yield, very important. And then the next section is just grower survey questions. Very, very straightforward, just selecting what practices you use. Only thing I wanted to note here is that some of the key practices that Morgan was discussing earlier. So in the KRWCA from the previous crop harvest year, irrigation and water nitrogen testing was only at about 81% of members. And we really have an expectation from the regulators to get that to 100%. So really think, of course, be honest, but really think carefully about that question. And if you're not doing it, try to find a way to start doing that in some form or fashion so we can get that number higher. Another one that I say is really important is this water application schedule to need. There's some limited situations such as delivery timings and such that it may be not able to schedule to need, but in general, it's probably best for a regulatory program to show that we're overwhelmingly at least scheduling water to need. And fortunately, that's about 97% of members, so doing pretty good there. So now we're going to move into ILRP Farm and just recap how to submit the ILRP summary report to the coalitions. So you go to your login page, you log in, you go over here and you click on the ILRP summary report sections to get to your report. So the first part you may come to is just the survey questions. Not going to spend, just like I showed on the previous slide there. So these survey questions are the same as these survey questions here. from the paper version. Very straightforward. You just click on these boxes to put a green check on the practices that you're using. And you do that for irrigation efficiency practices and nitrogen efficiency practices. I'm gonna, be bold and assume that that's pretty straightforward. You just tell us what practices you're using. No real math or calculations go into this part here. So just a few more survey questions there for nitrogen efficiency practices. So from there, we move into kind of the bulk of the INP summary report, which is that nitrogen applications and yield. So this is probably one of the more important grower reporting items, as I mentioned here. So this is where we really want to make sure we get this information right. Tell us how much nitrogen you're applying, tell us what your yield is, and then there's some more info and notes boxes over here. So you see a lot of red here. That means we need to fill those items in. So now, if we scroll back here, a lot of red here, we haven't filled it out. If we go to the next slide there, we don't see any red. We see that our validation up here says no issues found, and just some little graphical illustrations there to show that. So in this case, this is ideally, what we'd hope to see is mostly all green and no issues, or yellow. But just because there's some red or yellow, if that's what happened, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just may mean that for some reason or another, a value was a little high, and that could be just yield, for example, which, really high yield would not necessarily be a bad thing. It could just be up in that 99th percentile in the coalition or so, which would, but suppose someone has to have the highest yield in Kern County, right? So in this case, we've completed our information here. So this would mostly be done with the INP summary report. There's a lot that goes into driving these numbers, either yourself as a self-certified or working with your consultants. But in terms of once you have those numbers, entering them into the system, it's pretty straightforward. Just some common errors. Again, most of these, I think at this point, we're mostly on top of, but it could just be some general calculation errors, not reporting it on a per acre basis, inappropriately averaging across management units. We really want this reported on a field basis. We don't want to see these, really large fields unless they're truly managed the exact same. But, usually that's, not always the case. So it really should be on a field basis. But just wanted to say, as we summarize every year, that for the 2021 crop harvest year, only about 3,000 commodity acres in the KRWCA, or about 0.8% of the total reported acres, were flagged as ERA. And that's after follow-up. So after you report your data, you may hear from your coalition folks saying, hey, this data looks a little out of typical ranges here. We just want to confirm and verify. Please follow up with us on that, as you always have, because that just helps us make sure that your data looks as good as it can. But overall, our numbers look really good. Very few fields are kind of being identified as ERA, and that's a good thing. So we appreciate the help there and the good job that you're all doing that for us and yourself. But just to talk about some of that live validation, we mentioned the stoplight approach here several times, and there's extensive what we call live validation in ILRP farm. It's just flagging things as you enter them in a dynamic nature. It's mostly on minimum and maximum yields and things like that. And we're always refining those threshold values. So, just keep that in mind. If you see these colors, think of a stoplight and think about what it may mean. And if the information is correct and it's still flagged, that's okay. Leave it that way. But if something is flagged as red, though, here, like some of these values, you are required to click this more info button here and give us a little more information. So what is more info? I'll kind of throw it here on the screen. That just provides us a little more documentation about what may happen. Maybe it's you didn't get the harvest you wanted because of some pest pressures, some food safety issues that happened. Maybe it was market driven or something like that. So it just led to some lower than expected yields. So it just helps us document the issue, which if the regulator started poking around or having some questions about some of those values, we've got some documentation that we can kind of use to explain that it wasn't just maybe inappropriate nitrogen use or something like that, but there was legitimate reasons to it. So we really encourage using this more info box, even if your fields aren't flagged yellow or red. It's a good thing to do no matter what, if there's notes to give. But if it was flagged red, you must give us some of this information before proceeding. And if for no other reason, if you provide this information to us, it may help us, you may not hear from us as much because we may not have to follow up with you about some questionable data because you've already given us the information. So not hearing from us may be a good thing for some, I would guess. So now we're continuing with our regulatory form reporting process there. We've completed the ILRP summary report. We just need to go to the last step, which is the sign and submit page. So if you're here today, you should be able to select yes on this outreach attendance certification box, which show you checked another requirement of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program that you attended an annual outreach event. So pretty straightforward there. This is just a summary of the ILRP summary report. You don't want to see errors here, and you shouldn't be allowed to submit if there are any errors. But if all this looks good, we got green check marks here and it's saying no errors. You'll fill out the responsible party member name here and type in your signature, submit it, and then you can download your report there with that button, or you can also access all previous reports to that 10-year question mentioned earlier via a reports window on that side toolbar in ILRP Farm. So as we continue moving forward, all your previous reports will be archived there. But that's really the process to submitting the ILRP summary report. And then there's just one last item here to review your previous years, whatever crop harvest year that may be, outlier status. So there's just one more section at the bottom of the sign and submit page that just shows whether or not you were an outlier or not, similar to the NAR. And if you were an outlier, there's one more question that you have to give us some feedback on, and that's shown here. If you're not an outlier, you don't have to answer this question. So that's basically the last bit of the process. Note if you're an outlier or not. But and this just corresponds to the paper copy in terms of whether or not you're an outlier when you're notified via the NAR and things like that. So that's really the reporting process via ILRP Farm, but just wanted to touch again on the certification and continuing education requirements. So again, you do have to certify these forms for the most part. The vast majority of growers do. And if you're self-certified, that hasn't changed. Everything remains the same you need for now, although it may change in the future, but you need 3 hours of continuing education units every 3-year cycle to maintain your grower INMP self-certification certification. So just a reminder there. But this is one new item that just the last couple slides here is that I wanted to point out that this is a new item as of 2022, and you can actually complete your INMP grower self-certification program, not continuing education necessarily. This what I'm talking about right now is not continuing education. It's the actual program where you can take the course online and pass an exam and get your self-certification. So the California Department of Food and Agriculture Fertilizer Research Education Program, or CDFA FREP, quite a mouthful there, has taken over this program, and the coalitions are no longer administering that. And you can go to this link here, and if your certification expired, you didn't get your continuing education hours, or if you haven't done it yet, go spend about 2 or 3 hours if you're interested, pass the 30-question exam. You can do it on your time, on demand, and get your self-certification there. So if that's of interest to you, that's now available to you at no cost. Now moving to the continuing education side of things, just a couple slides on that, is this website linked here is where all of that is covered. And you can go on there and get your continuing education courses or see when events are coming up. Just a reminder is we recorded some. Many of you in Kern County probably remember Blake Sandin. We worked with him to record some webinars, and some University of California folks did. I did one, and these are just some on-demand videos for you to go and get your continuing education hours. So last item I want to touch on here as we transition away from the reporting is something new that's coming up. I talked a lot about the AR values and A/R ratios and what that means, and that there may be more things coming in terms of explicit numerical limits of what that means. And so how that is likely going to manifest is in something called groundwater protection formulas, values, and targets. So if you look at this graphic here, it kind of shows what this process is including. It's including the critical zone or the root zone, which is generally what growers manage. It's including this vadose zone, which is basically the space in between groundwater and the root zone. And it also includes the aquifer or groundwater itself. So this is going to be a substantial new regulatory metric. It's basically going to be a nitrogen use efficiency metric, if you will, or a nitrogen efficiency metric. And moving forward at an undetermined time, at this time, it'll likely be a primary grower nitrogen metric in the future for under the Irrigated Lands Program. So what is it exactly? Well, groundwater protection, the formula side is just basically how is it calculated? Think of an equation or like a spreadsheet or something like that. In this case, it happens to be a sophisticated model called the Soil Water Assessment Tool, but it's basically just a complex set of calculations that we use to plug in some numbers from the ILRP summary report, basically to get, and that's what the formula is. The value is basically the result of that formula. So it's informed by your ILRP summary reports that you submit to the coalition, and then we'll basically plug it into the formula and get a value from it. And that value basically represents your discharge, or this diagram here, your potential impact from your ranch on groundwater. That's what the value represents at a very high level. And then the target, and this is kind of the big new thing that's a part of this new program that's coming, is represents the amount of allowable nitrogen discharge within a township. That's the spatial area that it covers to protect water quality. And to come up with that is very complicated. You need to model the root zone, the vadose zone, groundwater characteristics, all that, and wrap it up all together. Very complicated, far beyond the scope of today's webinar, but just know that basically coalitions are going to likely compare the annual groundwater protection values to the targets and see if the value was less than or greater than the target. If it's greater than the target, it would kind of be like an outlier, if you will, or out of compliance potentially for a given township. And that's, you know, not what we'd want to see. We'd want to see that groundwater protection value being less than the target. So, you know, don't worry too much about this at this time. This is just the implementation details are pending, but, you know, it will be implemented maybe within the next year or so in some form or fashion, and we'll be doing more outreach about what that looks like and what it means. So it's pending for now. So with that, you know, I'm going to pass it back to Morgan unless there's any questions that I can answer for my section here. And I'm not seeing any. Yeah. So go ahead, Morgan.
Ryan, real quick, this is Nicole. One thing I just wanted to remind folks on the sign and submit page, I believe it was last year, it might have been the year before, we added a signature line. So there's a line to type in who completed the reports, and then there's a member signature line. The reminder is that the member signing the report or the name in that should be the member contact of record. The general order requires that the member submit a report. So we're seeing sometimes it's staff or a consultant that's signing, and they are not the member. So we just want to make sure that you are meeting the general order requirements and signing your documents properly. So just make sure that the member contact is listed in the signature section. And Ryan, there are two. Okay.
Yeah, I'll grab it looks like maybe that the previous link is broken. I just accessed that the other day, but you know, that's subject to change based on CDFA. So I'll paste the updated link in the chat in just a minute.
Great, thank you. All righty, Morgan.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm back for round two, and not all of you have to stay for this section. So this is about the general order requirement for on-farm drinking water well testing. If you do not have any wells on enrolled APNs that are active drinking water wells, so humans are actively consuming or using that water for cooking, you do not have to stay for this section. Feel free to exit the webinar, answer the attendance survey, and you are done for the day. But for those of you that this might be applicable to, I'll run through the general order requirements. So the general order does require that if you have an on-farm drinking water well, it needs to be tested annually for nitrate plus nitrite as N. And again, that's defined as a well that is located on an APN enrolled in the coalition. It has to be located on a parcel that's enrolled. So if you have an APN that has a house and it's not enrolled in or has a well and it's not enrolled in the coalition, then this general order requirement does not apply to that well. And that well needs to actively provide water for human consumptive use. And so the sampling window is on a calendar year basis. So it runs from January 1st through December 31st. We definitely recommend not waiting until the last minute. Labs do get backed up, and you do need to use an ILRP certified laboratory. And so I have a list of those laboratories on a future slide that are available to you in the Bakersfield area. If at the end of the day, you get your result back and it's over the MCL of 10 milligrams per liter, the drinking water maximum contaminant level, then the member does need to provide notice to the users using the nitrate notification template, which I'll show you on the next slide, and send a copy of that completed template to the regional board. So this is what the nitrate notification template looks like. Essentially, you would just fill in what the test result is. It has some public health information, and the intent is to notify anyone who might be drinking from that well not to do so and to use bottled water until further notice. You do need to provide this notice if your well tests over 10 milligrams per liter to both the resident and the regional board. Exceptions to this: you do not need to test your well if you are already providing replacement bottled water to the well user. You do need to keep your receipts in case of audit, but if you're providing replacement bottled water and no one is actively consuming from the well, then you do not need to test your well. If you have previously tested your well anytime between 2020 and 2022 under this program, and it exceeded the MCL, and you provided the notification template to the regional board, so you checked all the boxes, you do not have to do it again. So there are 2 ILRP certified laboratories in the Bakersfield area. It's BSK Associates and Zalco Laboratories. There's a larger list available online. If you are up and down the 99 and you're in Fresno or Visalia, there are additional labs available, but those are the only 2 in the Kern County area. So how to get your well tested. The very first thing you're going to do is fill out and follow the directions on the member information form. I have an example of that on the next page. And you will take the completed member information form to your preferred ILRP laboratory. When you give them that form, the lab will provide you with sampling bottles and a chain of custody. And you'll take that home, you'll take a sample of your well following the instructions provided, and you'll return that sample and the completed chain of custody to the laboratory. The laboratory will analyze the sample, they'll upload it to GeoTracker, which is the state's database. So that's part of complying with the program, is you not only have to do the notification if it exceeds 10 milligrams per liter, but the data ends up in GeoTracker, and the lab will also provide you with the results. If the results are greater than 10 milligrams per liter, you do need to provide the user and the regional board with a copy of the drinking water notification form. One exception to that rule, if only you and your immediate family consume the water from the tested well and it exceeds 10 milligrams per liter, and you said so on item 1J, I'll get to it, the member information form, which is this one. So where it says item 1J is the coalition member, including family, the only consumer of drinking water. If you say yes, you do not need to provide a copy of this drinking water notification template to yourself, essentially, and the regional board. So that is the one exception to having to notify the resident of the exceedance. So yes, this is what the member information form looks like. You will fill out your coalition member ID and name, your farm name, and this allows the regional board to verify that you have complied with this part of the general order. This program is run directly through the regional board. It's not something that the coalition helps facilitate. Everything is done between you, the laboratory, and the regional board. And so if you have additional questions, we do recommend reaching out to the regional board or visiting the regional board's on-farm drinking water webpage that has frequently asked questions, instructions, and all the templates and forms that you need. So as a note, that's wrapping up the content for today's webinar. We'll stay on and answer questions, but As you exit the webinar, please complete the meeting evaluation survey, and it'll pop up on the exit screen and for you to fill out, and a link will also be provided via email tomorrow. So please complete and submit that evaluation. It really helps us improve our outreach events to make them more helpful to you. With that, happy to answer any questions for folks that want to stick around, or if Nicole, you have a few words for everybody.
Thank you, Morgan. I do not have any other words. I don't see any new questions, chats, or raised hands. So with that,
Sorry, Nicole, I just see one raised hand for Jim, so I'm going to allow him to speak.
oh, okay. I do not see that on my end. Maybe because you're the host. Okay, whoever it's for, what is your question?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the Water Resources Boards on their website says if you have homes around your well that's being abandoned, it has to be done to 5 feet deep. Also, any wells that are drilled within the boundaries of a CalGEM oil field, even though they're water wells, should also be done to 5 feet.
Okay, so we are not.
Those are the requirements of the state, and
Well,
I'm a registered engineer, so I know this.
Okay, so
So
we
your
are sharing information that comes straight from Kern County Department of Health, and they are the regulatory industry for Kern County. So we are sharing the information that they require. The regional board may be sharing something that's not specific to Kern County. I'm not sure, but
Every well that I've been involved with abandonment, and it's been hundreds, has been 5 feet.
okay. That's good information, but that's not what Kern County seems to be requiring. And the information we share comes directly from the county, and it's
I
not my
understand.
area of expertise to.
I'm just saying, if people, you get in, and I had a client that got into trouble by not following the reputation right, the recommendation right, and he had to go back and redo it. He had to dig it up the backhoe and get it redone.
Oh.
So
Okay.
I know a case that has happened, because even though it was okay for the county, that it wasn't okay for the state.
Okay, we
So
appreciate the information.
I'm just saying, people got to find out what the rules are when they do their abandonment and get their programs approved by the appropriate agencies.
Absolutely, and that is what our message is. You can't just go and do it yourself. You have to hire the appropriate people that are supposed to know the laws and regulations at the time. So I would agree with that statement. Hire a professional that knows what they're doing and make sure it's certified. That's part of the requirement that we are pushing. Is you can't just cover it up and call it properly abandoned. There are processes to go through.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting, because I've got a project right now that there's 18 previous abandoned wells in this area. They're not water wells; these happen to be oil and gas wells, but there's 18 of them that we have to go find, dig up, and re-abandon them because they weren't done properly. So it's
Right.
kind of a heck. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Jim. We
Okay.
have a question. Why does the farm builder not allow you to use 0 field acres for a field unless the crop is fallowed? Because you have to assign a crop to a field. This is an irrigated lands program. So the only way you have 0 acres is if it's fallow. You can't have 0 acres of pistachios or 0 acres of watermelons. You have to have an acreage if it's a crop. If you don't have anything planted, then we do call, and then there are 2 different types of fallow. One would be fallow because you didn't plant it and you have it enrolled as 0 irrigated acres, which some people still do because they rotate in and out of farming that land. People might have enrolled, say, a 100-acre field, but then they didn't have water, or there was another reason they didn't plant it. They paid for the 100 acres. So in order to make all the reports balance out, like Morgan was talking about, then you have to select fallow irrigated acres enrolled so that our computer system knows to add that 100 acres in when it's tallying everything up to make everything match. And then there was a question about, is a dry farmed field with no nitrogen applied? Oh, it's a dry. Well, if it's dry farmed and it's not irrigated, it shouldn't be part of the program to begin with, because this is an irrigated lands program. So if that's the case and it's not irrigated, you can contact me and we can remove it from your membership. I don't know who it is because it says anonymous. So feel free to reach out and I can help you with that. All right, it looks like that is all of the questions. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to contact myself or any of the other managers directly if you have questions that we were not able to answer today. Have a good evening and Happy New Year.